So starting off on the agenda, we'll cover the clinical trial master file, the TMF, and then what we mean by the electronic trial master file, the eTMF. And then there are 3 areas during the trial that we have to collect certain documentation before the trial begins, during the trial progress, and then after the trial is either completed or terminated. Then we'll get into what we mean by GXP systems or FDA-regulated systems and talk about the importance of the computer system validation process in order to ensure that your computer system is validated properly and you're able to maintain data with integrity. And when we talk about data, it's structured data in database files, but it's also unstructured data. Many of the trial master file content documents are Word, Excel, any other type of PowerPoint, audio, images, anything you can imagine. Then we'll talk about CSV maintenance, the importance of not only validating your system, but maintaining it in a validated state. We'll talk about GXP documentation principles, and then the policies and procedures to support your efforts. And we'll get into 21 CFR Part 11 for electronic records and signatures, the guidance from FDA, and talk a little about FDA regulatory oversight and inspection and some of the trends we're seeing. Finally, we'll recap and have a Q&A. So what is the trial master file, the TMF? It's a collection of documents and other artifacts that are related to human clinical trials. And these are the trials that are done under FDA regulations. So we're talking about pharmaceutical, medical device companies, biotechnology, and even tobacco and tobacco-related companies like e-liquids and vaping, those types of things, cigars. All of those are now under the umbrella of FDA. The TMF documents, individually and collectively, will allow your organization to evaluate the trial conduct, how it was conducted, and also the quality of data that's produced throughout. And again, that's data, structured data, and documents, or unstructured data. The documents demonstrate the compliance of the investigator, the sponsor, and the monitor involved in the trial to make sure they're meeting the standards of good clinical practice, or GCP, and all applicable regulatory requirements. And the GCPs are part of the overall GXP, where X is a variable, good manufacturing practices, good laboratory practices, and good clinical practices. These are foundational predicate rules from FDA that must be met regardless of anything else. Now, a TMF could be paper-based, hard copy, or it could be electronic in format. It could even be a combination of the two, and most often it is. Now, the volume of paper or size of the electronic files is going to be proportional to the size and complexity of the trial, and it can be very voluminous. The TMF is built throughout the trial, and you have to maintain it for a period afterward for inspection in accordance with GCP and local regulations. And I believe currently you have to maintain those files for 25 years. Even if the trial is terminated at some point, you still have to maintain the documentation. Now, the TMF content differs by sponsor, and that creates a high degree of variability and inconsistency. There are many different types of sponsors, many types of CRO organizations, contract resource organizations you'll work with to gather clinical trial information. And everyone uses their own procedures and methods, mechanics for getting that data to you. In the European Union, the regulatory requirements for trial master files differs from those in the US in definition and the actual requirements. The EU requires your TMF to have the documents show whether the investigator and sponsor complied with good clinical practice and applicable requirements. Now, like the EU, the US FDA recognizes the value of TMFs as contributing information to support the good clinical practice of your trial. But unlike the EU, the US FDA doesn't have a formal requirement for maintaining essential documents for a human clinical trial as published in the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations. They do require, however, that trials meet International Conference on Harmonization, the ICH, GCP requirements, meaning there is an expectation that a TMF will be created and maintained accordingly. And the ICH is supported by the US, Europe, and Japan. ICH published a minimum required set of essential documents for a TMF, which can help you determine what you need to collect and maintain. The minimal essential documents for human clinical trials can be found in the document ICH Good Clinical Practices, published in 1997. You can find that on the internet. Now, some examples of minimum essential documents identified by ICH are things like your signed protocol, study protocol, your audit certificate, your subject enrollment log. And other countries also follow the guidelines in their particular national medicines legislation. So you need to know where the trial is going to be held and also where the product is going to be distributed. The ICH guidance includes details for only the minimum list of documents and artifacts. There may be others that have to be maintained. And there is no other regulation or guideline that provides a comprehensive list of TMF content. Trial sponsors still continue to have difficulty identifying exactly what the TMF should include. Now, while ICH Good Clinical Practice does not describe the documentation requirements for setting up and maintaining quality systems, electronic systems, safety monitoring, and proof of an adequate and well-controlled trial, but you can find those types of requirements in other regulatory documents. So as a result of the lack of any kind of standard set of minimum requirements, the Drug Information Association, the DIA, went ahead and developed their own standard list of TMF content. The TMF reference model team was created in 2009. This is part of the Documents and Records Management community within the DIA. The TMF reference model, which was described by them, provides for standardization across industry, and that's whether you're using paper, electronic format, or some combination of the two. Version 2.0 of the TMF reference model was issued in June 2012. And that included a lot of input and feedback from industry. In particular, artifacts were added for investigator site files, device trials, medical devices, and investigator-initiated studies. Now, there's no formal effort and progress by anyone to develop a formal published standard. So the reference model, the Trial Master File reference model, helps companies and industries to standardize on the content of their TMF, along with the nomenclature used for artifacts and the taxonomy used. So by calling things by the same name, by structuring your collection of documents in a specific way, you're going to be able to retrieve, search, and even compare documents across different platforms, and also for paper across files. Now, the Drug Information Association doesn't consider the Trial Master File reference model as a formal standard. The objective of the TMF reference model is to provide a single, unified interpretation of the ICH regional regulations as a document type listing. So it's basically a listing of documents that would be considered a minimal set of requirements. The guidance doesn't instruct stakeholders on how to create, manage, or retain content. So basically, how you do this is up to you. They do give you a list of what you should include, but how you do it is company specific. Now, a goal was for all clinical trial stakeholders to accept the standard, and another goal was to have it adopted or adapted by any company, institution, or organization in the world. Now, the TMF Reference Model version 3.0 was also issued. It contains several duplicate artifact names with different contexts and uses, and which vary in length, making this a little troublesome. There are also more challenging ways to implement an eTMF, an electronic trial master file for search and retrieval. There are a lot of tricky aspects of how you define things in terms of nomenclature used and the taxonomy or structure of your files. Also, you have the challenges of interoperability across different systems and platforms. Since electronic systems are not based on interoperability standards all the time, especially when you have a far-reaching trial, you may not be able to communicate effectively with others. So think about how you would lay this out initially if you're going to do a trial. Who are the players? What are their systems if you're going to have electronic data capture or document capture? How interoperable are they? What lengths do you have to go to be able to exchange and then search and trend on information? The TMF Reference Model version 3.0 spreadsheet requires manual modification if you're going to use it for your own organization as a means of a classification taxonomy in your own electronic database. But they do provide the spreadsheet. You simply have to work it the way it meets the requirements of your organization. The TMF Reference Model version 3.0 also doesn't have a specific control vocabulary based on any published standards. Content indexed with its artifact names and terms might return duplicate, incorrect, or possibly no records at all. So you want to have a controlled vocabulary within your own organization wherever possible. But then you have a lot of stakeholders, people doing the monitoring, the sponsor, people who are sending in the various documents and data files. You need to have some type of controlled vocabulary to avoid any duplicates, incorrect, or missing records so that you can index these and be able to retrieve, search and retrieve more easily. It's all about how you set it up if you're in the electronic world. Now, in 2013, the European Medicines Agency, the EMA, put together a draft guidance recognizing the importance and legal equivalence of the paper trial master file and the electronic trial master file. Paper trial master file documents can be stored in electronic trial master file systems. Paper can be scanned in, and as long as you verify that process and assure that what was scanned was equivalent to the original, then you can destroy the paper afterward. The use of eTMF systems is important because electronic storage is much better in terms of when you have volumes of data, you want to do search and retrieval. The electronic systems will help you do that. And it's fully supported by the EMA in clinical trials as a replacement for paper. But you can still have a combination of the two, or you can choose to scan all your paper in. There may be quality problems with TMFs, trial master files that have paper content, but also with eTMFs, with electronic content. And that might be due to document quality, discrepancies in information, improper labeling when the documents are sent or received, or even missing documents. That can happen with paper or electronic. In the European Union, the TMF or paper version must contain all clinical trial essential documents, and they must be maintained contemporaneously, meaning if you do scan your documents into an eTMF, they should be scanned in immediately when you receive them. Contemporaneously means when the event happens. Also, anything that you're collecting should be documented and recorded, whether on paper or electronic, at the time the event happens or an activity is performed. The FDA is particularly concerned with making sure that everyone is recording things at the time they happen. In the EU, it's the same. The sponsor and the investigator are also required to archive the content for at least 25 years after the trial ends. And that can be whether it is finished, comes to its completion, or whether it's terminated early. Even if you don't put a product out to market based on the trial, you still have to retain all of the documentation collected. Now, this is a minimum retention period across the EU, whether or not the data subsequently support a marketing authorization approval. Now, there are many reasons why an organization might want to put an effective electronic trial master file management application in place, a software program, an application that will allow you to manage all of your trial master file content. There's always the growth in regulations. You have country, state, federal, industry regulations that are constantly growing and evolving. And then there's risk management. There may be significant risks and penalties if you don't comply. You can receive fines. There can be customer lawsuits. And also product quality. Enhanced product quality will happen if you have easier audits and management. You'll be able to find issues and be able to resolve them faster. An eTMF will help you accelerate your clinical trials because you have electronic document sharing. You can resolve issues faster and accelerate the trial process. Now, certainly if a trial has to be a set length in time, you can't speed that up, but you can speed up any interruptions. Cost savings. You're going to save on mail, overnight couriers, physical storage, administrative staff, and handling and pushing around all of the paper, and handling and management costs for all of the stakeholders. There's also a time savings. So anytime, anywhere, you can access documents and help move business operations forward faster than using a manual paper-based process. You can respond to your stakeholders faster when questions arise. The eTMF also provides an ease and speed of access, exchange, and management of documents. Now, this, of course, is predicated on the idea that you have system interoperability, that you're able to use common formats in terms of file types so that you're exchanging things that can be accepted and read as is, or at least if you have to convert them, there's a simple process to do that. If you have to convert any type of document or file that's coming in to a different format, you must test and validate that process and make sure it's working properly and document it before using it. Documents are more easily protected with electronic means. So obviously you're not as likely to lose documents or have them destroyed in any way or misplaced. And the documents will show fewer errors because you can use quality control checking processes electronically to scan those documents and make sure that you're looking for the most common errors and pulling those aside. Electronic systems also facilitate patient recruitment and enrollment. So a lot of stakeholders expect to have electronic access to the clinical trial eTMF archives for accelerated review. Anyone who is looking at the data, looking at the documentation, and doing a review or an audit of your documentation is going to have an easier way to access it, and they will expect it to be electronic. Paper-based signature capture and handling processes can also be minimized by using digital signatures. So you can have digital signatures, electronic signatures, replacing having someone sign each paper or form and then scan them in. The digital signature takes care of that. But again, if you have an electronic system with digital signature capability, that must be thoroughly tested and validated, and you have to assure security and access control. You also have to make sure you can authenticate every individual, whether it's biometrically through a thumbprint, or it's even a combination of symbols or words like your user ID and password. The paper-based TMF reference model lacks several core components that are suitable for an eTMF schema. The TMF reference model doesn't have anything related to being machine readable. There's no provision for digital signatures. There's no specification for tagging files with metadata or data about data, which you can do electronically. And there's no specification for how TMF repositories and archives can be exchanged or made searchable. All of these things relate to electronic files, and so the basic paper-based TMF reference model does not address them. But you can address these separately. And one way to do that is to rely on an enterprise content management system, an ECM, commonly found across organizations, which will help you to take all of your content and manage it effectively. The standard ECM system components include a schema or classification system for documents, and then documents themselves can have tags or terms associated with them which are considered metadata or data about data. Even an audit trail about the document showing version control, showing who did what action to the document and when. That's all captured as part of your metadata electronically. Now, the ECM-based eTMF automates methods and workflows for document and content. So through an enterprise content management system, you can automate your collection, your classification, your indexing, archival, reporting, and your database or repository. All of that can fall under that umbrella and be managed more effectively. An effective electronic trial master file system, the model builds on several foundational components. So you have a machine-readable classification scheme. That drives to consistency, improved productivity, and interoperability across systems and platforms. You can have published standards-based terms that are available in machine-readable format. And you can have automated digital signature capture to minimize the paper involved, automated document audit trail and workflow history to show chain of custody and everything happening to data and documents throughout their life cycle, and web standard bases to support XML, HTTP to exchange, view and manage eTMF content. Now, most countries worldwide, in addition to the US and the European Union, will accept digital signatures in place of handwritten or wet ink signatures. This eliminates the need for manually signing and scanning documents. There is optical character recognition, or OCR, software. You can use that to convert digital images into machine-readable and searchable text. Optical mark recognition, or OMR. That type of software extracts values from things like checkboxes or bubbles on the form or paper. That way you can identify things electronically versus having to read them. It allows you to do document classification to prepare for indexing. Indexing adds unique document identifiers or tags to each document for rapid document retrieval. And using consistent identifiers allows you to look at things comparatively. Indexes are comprised of metadata retrieved from a predefined index classification topology that's part of your ECM schema. Some indexing can even be automated through a database lookup of metadata attributes. And all of this automation can reduce labor and cost, and again, can accelerate the trial in the terms of being able to keep it moving. Now, stored documents have to be managed, including the storage location, the duration of storage, movement of documents from one media to another, and the final destruction. Once a document is no longer required to be held under retention, you want to destroy it to avoid any liability. You can also apply compliance rules to capture document collection requirements, policies and procedures, and ensure the right documents are collected in the eTMF. The compliance rules built in will make sure that your system works with you to let you know where you are, to generate exception reports, for example, to make sure that all of the particular requirements of policies and procedures are met. Often the eTMF compliance rules are expressed as part of a standard operating procedure or SOP, and those rules are captured electronically, built into the system as instruction to make sure capture is done properly. Use of electronic records and signatures also requires compliance with FDA's 21 CFR Part 11, their guidance for electronic records and signatures, which was issued in 1997. So those specific requirements have to be met, mostly in terms of security, access, control, and so forth. You can build predefined quality control checks into your eTMF system. Incoming document batches can be sampled. You can use standards-based processes to help ensure document integrity and quality when you have large batches of documents. And the eTMF can be audited much more easily. You can have an audit trail of system access, login, and user activity, and your document workflow history, including the date, event, source of the event, and person involved for each change or modification of a piece of data or a document. Document audits internally for quality and compliance are much easier to do. You can have pre-configured document management reports, as I mentioned before, exception reports, or other types that can be generated from the eTMF and can be emailed to any subscribers or stakeholders. This way, you can keep track of things much more readily, and you can report any type of information that you want. Report examples are missing documents, exceptions, captured by type, site, investigator, or other person or category. So there are many, many ways you can report out information, know more about what's going on in the trial, and be able to remedy any type of issue. Document retrieval in the electronic context can be very complex and powerful. Retrieval can be aided by using a specific unique document identifier. The eTMF system can use the basic index or non-indexed query on its data store to retrieve a document. And you can also use partial search terms involving the document identifier, type, or parts of the expected metadata. This is a very powerful way to be able to search and retrieve. Many document management systems offer content integration and exchange capabilities through open standards. And this is based on a specification for easier integration and web-based exchange of enterprise documents and records. So building your eTMF and using an electronic content management system, Enterprise Content Management System, ECM, will help you in many ways expedite the work that's being done and ensure higher quality and compliance. Of course, you have to set it up right, and you have to structure everything so that you are capturing what you really are looking for. It takes some time to do that. The Content Management Interoperability Services Specification, the CMIS, is a format for improving interoperability across systems and platforms, but it does fail to specify any specific format for an archive's metadata, document type, names, or other core schema. So the eTMF ontology was created to resolve that, allowing eTMF archives to be much more readily and easily exchanged, imported, or exported through the CMIS standard. So both the CMIS and the eTMF ontology can be helpful in how you build out your eTMF. Now, metadata attributes or tags are used to capture data values for every document for classification, allowing them to be searched, allowing reporting. The metadata and metadata values are stored with either the document in the electronic TMF archive or with the actual document embedded as a metadata tag. So examples of standards-based metadata might be document archive metadata such as date, creator, site ID. And you can extract that metadata from the document automatically, or as a user, you can be prompted to add metadata to a particular document. Documents which are considered the clinical trial essential files. These will individually and collectively allow you to evaluate how well the clinical trial is conducted and what level of quality is produced in your data. These are your essential documents. These documents demonstrate the compliance of the investigator, the sponsor, the monitor, all of these stakeholders with the standards of good clinical practice, or GCPs, and applicable regulatory requirements, including ICH. Filing essential documents at the investigator institution and sponsor sites in a timely manner will greatly assist in how you can successfully manage your trial, how it can be managed by the investigator, sponsor, and the monitor. The documents are usually audited by the sponsor's independent auditor, and they're inspected by regulatory authorities. These bodies will confirm trial conduct validity and data integrity. And there is a minimum list of essential documents that are grouped in 3 sections based on the stage or phase of the trial during which they are normally generated. The first, before the clinical phase of the trial begins, the second, during the actual conduct of the trial, and the third, after the trial is either completed or terminated early. Each document has a specific description providing the purpose and indicating whether it should be filed in either investigator institution or sponsor files or both. And some documents may be combined, provided that you retain the individual elements so that they can be readily identified. Trial master files should be established at the beginning of the trial, both at the investigator institution site and at the sponsor site. A final closeout of a trial can only be done when the monitor has reviewed both the investigator, institution, and the sponsor files and confirmed that every required document is in the appropriate files. Any or all of the documents should be available for audit by the sponsor's auditor and by inspection by regulatory authorities. So what are the documents to collect before the trial begins? There are 20 documents identified that should be generated and should be stored before the trial actually starts. The investigator's brochure. This documents that relevant and current scientific information about the product you're investigating has been provided to the investigator. The signed protocol and amendments, if there are any, and sample case report form, or CRF, will document the investigator and sponsor agreement to the protocol, the amendments, and the CRF. Everyone must be in agreement, and that must be signed off on. Information that's provided to any subject of a clinical trial will document the informed consent and any other written information to document that subjects will be given appropriate written information to support their ability to give fully informed consent. Any advertisements for subject recruitment should be documented so that the measures are appropriate and not coercive. And financial aspects of the trial should document any financial agreement between the investigator institution and the sponsor of the trial. An insurance statement will document that compensation to subjects for any injuries sustained during a trial will be available. A signed agreement between involved parties documenting that the investigator, institution, and sponsor, or investigator, institution, and CRO, or sponsor and CRO are in agreement. Dated and document approval, favorable opinion, based on a review by an institutional review board, an IRB, or an independent ethics committee, an IEC. They're going to review the protocol, the amendments, the CRF, the informed consent forms, and any other written information to be provided to the subject, such as advertising and compensation. The IRB-IEC composition should be documented to show that it is constituted in agreement with good clinical practice. And the regulatory authorities' authorization, approval, notification of protocol should be documented to show it was provided by the regulatory authorities and was obtained from them prior to initiating the trial. And there should be a curriculum vitae or resume or other relevant documents, training documents, anything evidencing qualifications and eligibility of the investigators, any sub-investigators that are used, who are going to conduct the trial or provide medical supervision of the subjects. All of that should be on file. You should document the normal values and ranges for any medical, laboratory, or technical procedures or tests that are included in the protocol. Medical, laboratory, technical procedures or tests, certification, accreditation, established quality control, and external quality assessment or other validation should all be documented to show the competence of the facility to perform the tests required and support that the results are reliable and valid. Samples of labels should be attached to the investigational product containers to document compliance with applicable labeling regulations and the appropriateness of the instructions that are given to trial subjects. There should be instructions for handling investigational products and trial-related materials, making sure that proper storage, packaging, dispensing, and disposition is done and is understood. There should be shipping records for investigational products and trial-related materials, documenting the shipment dates, the batch numbers, shipment method, to allow tracking of product batch, review of shipping conditions, and full accountability. And certificates of analysis for the investigational products that are shipped. This will allow you to document the identity, purity, and strength of these items. There should also be some documentation to show what the decoding procedures are for blinded trials. These document how, in case of emergency, the identity of a blinded product can be revealed without breaking the blind for the remaining subjects. A randomization list documents the method for randomization of the trial population. The pre-trial monitoring report documents that the site is suitable to conduct the trial. And the trial initiation monitoring report. This documents that the trial procedures were reviewed with the investigator and with the investigator's trial staff prior to starting the clinical trial. Now, the second set of documents is what you will collect during the trial conduct. During a clinical trial, 25 additional documents should be added to the TMF as evidence that all new relevant information is documented when it becomes available. It should be documented contemporaneous to any action or event. And this is true for a TMF or an eTMF. You want the investigator brochure updates, any updates made to show that the investigator has informed in a timely manner any relevant information that becomes available. Any revision to a protocol, an amendment, a CRF, or any written information, any type of revision should be provided to subjects to document the revisions taking effect during the trial. The dated documented approval, favorable opinion of the IRB or IEC of the protocol amendment, the informed consent form, any other written information that's given to the subject, the advertisement for recruitment of subjects, and any other document showing approval or favorable opinion during the conduct of the trial. This will document the opinion, the document number, and the date, showing this is all on file as these things happen. Regulatory authorities giving authorizations or approvals, notifications were required for protocol amendments and other documents to document compliance with all applicable regulatory requirements. The curriculum vitae, resume training logs for new investigators or sub-investigators to show they're qualified. And any updates to normal values or ranges for medical, laboratory, technical, and procedures and tests that are included in the protocol to document normal values and ranges revised during the conduct of the trial. Again, it is very important to do these as they happen. Any updates of medical, laboratory, technical procedures, tests, certification or accreditation or established quality control, and or external quality assessment or other validation where required. You want to document that tests remain adequate throughout the trial period. Documents on investigational products and trial-related materials shipped during the course of the trial. So where product is they're running out of product, they need to have more shipped. You want to make sure that this is done and documented and traced. Certificates of analysis for any new batches of investigational new products through the course of the trial. And monitoring visit reports, documenting site visits by and findings from the monitor of the study. Relevant communications other than site visits where there are letters, meeting notes, even notes of telephone calls. All of these should be documented, showing agreement or significant discussions regarding trial administration, the protocol violations, trial conduct, adverse event reporting. Anything that happens where there is communication, it should be documented. And if you have a new person added to the trial, signed informed consent forms documenting that they are consenting, and this was recorded prior to them joining the trial. This should be documented as it happens before the person starts the trial. Source documents, documenting the existence of the subject and substantiate integrity of the trial data collected. And that will include original documents related to the trial, to medical treatment or history of a subject. A signed, dated, and completed case report form, CRF, every one that is created documenting that the investigator or authorized member of their staff confirms the observations they're recording. And documentation of any corrections to a CRF, showing any changes or additions or corrections made to the CRF after the initial data were recorded. These should be done according to good documentation practices. Notification by originating investigator to sponsor when there is a serious adverse event that occurs, and any related reports. Notification by the sponsor and or investigator to the regulatory authorities and to the IRB-IEC if there is an unexpected serious adverse drug reaction or other safety information reported. And notification by sponsor to investigators of any safety information. There should be interim or annual reports provided to the IRB and IEC and to any regulatory authorities. and a subject screening log, documenting the identification of any subjects who entered pretrial screening. Subject identification code list documents that the investigator or institution keeps a confidential list of names of subjects allocated to trial numbers on enrolling in the trial. This allows the investigator or institution to reveal the identity of any subject if necessary. Subject enrollment log, documenting the chronological enrollment of subjects by trial number. And investigational products accountability at the site to document that every investigational product has been used according to the protocol. A signature sheet is important to document signatures and initials of everyone who's authorized to make any entries or corrections on CRFs. The signature sheet will be the authentic signature of the person that can be compared later on to make sure everything was signed by the appropriate person who's qualified. Records of any retained body fluids or tissue samples should document the location and identification of these samples, particularly if assays need to be repeated later on. Now, the third category is all of the documentation you collect after the clinical trial is complete. And it could be completed because it's the normal completion date, or it could be terminated early. All of the documents identified before and during the trial should also be already in the file together with these new documents. The investigational products accountability. This is done at the site to document that the investigational products have been used based on the protocol, and also records the final accounting of products received, dispensed to subjects, returned by subjects, and returned by the sponsor. A full accounting and chain of custody. Documentation of investigational product destruction. Any products that are destroyed, if they're unused at the end of the study, should be identified and documented. The completed subject identification code list. This allows the identification of any subjects enrolled in the trial in case any follow-up is required. The list should be maintained as a confidential document and for an agreed-upon time frame with the subjects. The audit certificate will document that an audit was performed, and a final trial closeout monitoring report will document that every activity required to close out the trial was completed and that copies of all essential documents are contained in the appropriate files. Treatment allocation and coding documentation returned to sponsor. This will document any decoding that might have occurred during the trial. A final report by the investigator to the IRB-IEC and to the regulatory authorities to document completion of the trial, indicating it is completed. Clinical study report documents the results of the trial and the interpretation of the data. The final trial closeout monitoring report documents that all activities required to close out the trial are complete and copies of essential documents are held in the right places. Treatment allocation and decoding documentation returned to sponsor to document decoding that occurred. Now, it's important to understand that as you're collecting all of these documents, if you're using an electronic system, or even if you're not, you need to adhere to the GXPs, the predicate rules based on FDA's requirements. These cannot be varied from. GXP is where X is a variable. So again, good manufacturing, good laboratory, and good clinical practices. Here we're interested in the GCPs. And electronic systems that are GXP systems, in other words, they are systems regulated by FDA. We talk about IT and automated systems. In most cases in a clinical trial, we're talking about IT or application software packages used to manage data and documents. But there could be automated systems used in laboratories to collect information, or automated systems used to monitor or control a process or some type of instrument or piece of equipment in terms of making your product. These are the systems that are used in data collection, storage, management, reporting, labeling, tracking, any other key operational process related to the conduct of a trial. Data being structured and unstructured data. If the system does how FDA expresses it, touches an FDA-regulated product, meaning it is used to be some type of confirmation or verification that the product was handled properly, then you have to validate it according to the FDA's requirements for computer system validation, or CSV. And these are some samples of the types of systems you might find related to a clinical trial. There might be research and study management, protocol development and management, sample labeling and tracking, patient enrollment, data collection, management, and reporting for clinical trial data, sample manufacturing and testing, and your trial master file system itself. Again, these could be paper systems or electronic or a combination. But note that you also have to take into account any interfaces or points of integration of these systems. These systems must be validated. They are GXP FDA-regulated systems, but they may link to another system through an interface or integration point. And you cannot mix a validated system with a system that's not validated. So if you have a validated system and you have software instructions or data coming from another system to your system, that other systems should be equally validated. And think about all the stakeholders, including all your third-party participants, and how they're going to collect their data, whether on paper or electronically. The sponsors, researchers, the manufacturers, auditors, quality control, the IT and computer system validation people at your organization if you have electronic systems, testers of those systems, record review. There are many other functions involved. Now, the FDA came out with their first guidance on computer system validation in 1983, and it was called the Blue Book because it was on paper, no computers around at that time, or not many, and it was on blue paper. They defined CSV very simply and eloquently as the process of assuring that a system does what it purports to do, and that you've thoroughly tested it and validated it to prove it. Now, what the system purports to do is your requirements, and testing and validation must be done against those requirements. It's based on the Standard System Development Lifecycle, or SDLC, methodology for computers. Includes every phase from cradle to grave, from inception to retirement. And throughout the cycle, you'll go through a lot of planning, testing, and documentation every time there's a change. You must ensure that once your system's validated, you maintain it in a validated state and have documentation to prove that. Now, you want to make sure that any systems you're using, you understand who is involved with those systems. If you have an enterprise content management or an electronic TMF system of some kind, or even systems that handle certain modules of the work that's done, you want to make sure you have resources involved who are trained in how to use those systems. People who are developing or maintaining those systems need to know what they have to comply with in terms of FDA documentation, and also quality auditors, anyone who's doing the validation work. You want to make sure that they are fully trained and it's documented so that they are able to do their role in accordance with FDA requirements. And you can see in the System Development Life Cycle methodology, even when you're in maintenance or production mode over on the left side, you're still going to have changes. Once validated, your system should go under formal change control. And at that point, you should make sure that every change is documented, Any proposed change is evaluated in terms of the potential risk it could pose to making the change in the system. And then you also are looking at testing to make sure it's working properly and not having a negative impact on any other code through regression testing to make sure that's okay. You should have a strategic approach in your company for how you validate systems, understanding how you develop a rationale for the amount of testing to prove it does what it purports to do, and understanding who's involved in the process. How will you get documentation and approvals done? How will you do the training for people who are using, developing, maintaining, or validating or auditing the systems? How will you handle organizational change management? An ECM or an eTMF could be a very big undertaking and it's going to change the way people do things. How will you make sure that people are embracing the changes? Who's going to create or update the policies and procedures needed for the electronic systems? And how are you going to maintain them in a validated state? When you're doing your validation work, the first document or validation plan should take into account the size, the complexity, and the business criticality of your system. That's going to help you determine how much testing to do. But you should also look at the risk. FDA is very, very focused on risk assessment. And you need to ask the question for your system. If it were to fail, what impact would that have on the process or product and ultimately on a patient or consumer? A risk-based approach to validation is your best practice. FDA can't visit every company and look at every computer system they have. So in the early 2000s, they put the onus on industry to evaluate the risk of every system and prioritize them based on risk using a standard risk approach. And that can be any standard risk approach as long as you use it consistently across your organization. So for all of your GXP systems, you need to look at any way that the system potentially could fail. And there could be many ways and unrelated ways that they could fail. The system failure, if it happened, what's the probability? What's the severity of impact if it happens? Would it be detectable? Would you know it? And what mitigation do you have in place, whether it's procedural or technical controls, to counteract the risk? Based on these 4 areas, you can look at the potential risk scenario and come up with some type of rating, whether high, medium, low, 1 to 5, 1 to 10, as long as you do it consistently and identify or define what you mean by high, medium, and low, for example. You also want to look at your overall risk of a particular system based on all the scenarios you came up with. So say you had 5 or 6 risk scenarios and you came up with a rating for each. You looked at them across the 5 or 6 scenarios and came up with an overall potential risk for that system if it were to fail. Based on that, you determine how much validation testing to do. And also, you should create an inventory of all your GXP systems prioritized by risk, the highest risk system at the top of the list. In addition to risk and size, complexity, and business criticality, you want to look at the category of system. Now, in most cases, in an eTMF or an ECM type system, it's going to be usually a configurable system. There might be custom code. The ISPE, or International Society of Pharmaceutical Engineers, came up with the Good Automated Manufacturing Practices, now version GAMP5. This categorizes software types, which helps you better understand how to go about testing them. So category 1 is your operating systems, database software, things that are very heavily road tested throughout industry and really only require you to do an installation qualification, making sure it's installed according to instructions and capturing that information as you're doing it. Category 2 was eliminated when they went from GAMP4 to 5. Category 3 is off-the-shelf products you use as is. Now with an ECM or an eTMF, you're going to have to customize or at least develop your own schema, your own taxonomy, your own naming conventions. There's a lot of it that's going to have to be set up specifically for your organization. So it's not likely you'll find an off-the-shelf package to do that. Category 4 is configurable code, where you can set different parameters to different values. You can turn features on and off. It's configurable. In category 5, you have custom code, actual code written to perform a function. You could also have configurable and custom code, which is likely in the case of an ECM or eTMF. Every category has to undergo some level of testing, and you should figure out, based on size, complexity, business criticality, risk, and GAMP5 category, how much testing you should do. Your validation plan should have a rationale explaining the level and type of testing you're going to do based on those 5 factors. So you start with your requirements, determine the category, assess the overall risk, look at size, complexity, and business criticality, and come up with a rationale for validation testing. Determine the SDLC phases, the steps and deliverables required. Determine how much testing, who will do that testing, and you'll also have to do the OQ and PQ test protocols, scripts, and scenarios. That's in addition to your installation qualification, or IQ. OQ being operational qualification, making sure requirements are met, and PQ, performance qualification, or UAT. And that tells you that it meets the standard requirements for OQ, but you go beyond that and really challenge it. Now, IQ and OQ, you can sometimes purchase a package, protocols, from the vendor, or you could even have them execute that. And that will help shorten the time to get your system up and running. But you have to have oversight. PQ, on the other hand, has to be done by your subject matter experts, your users. If external resources prepare the actual test scenarios and scripts in a PQ, it can be done only if user input is provided. Also, if you're doing using a vendor to help you, there should be a vendor audit, and you should make sure they're following good documentation practices. You want a vendor that's mature, has likely been around for a long time. The package, if it's configurable even or out of the box, has been heavily tested, and that they're going to have a more robust and mature quality management system. A mature vendor will likely be familiar with GDPs if they're working in life science industries. So when you're about to validate your system, who's going to be using it and for what purpose? The FDA expects you to validate or test it for its intended purpose. How are you going to manage all the implementation and validation activities? Do you have any prerequisites? Is a vendor going to be involved? How are you going to train people? Your validation plan should include a scope of the effort, the size, complexity, business criticality, software category, and risk assessment to be able to come up with a manner of testing that fits proof that the system does what it purports to do. Now, in the validation process, after a validation plan, you have user requirement specification, users telling you what they want the system to do at a high level, business terminology. That gets drilled down into a functional requirement specification, FRS, which is detailed, unique, and testable requirements for your system. This has to all be maintained, all of your validation documentation, as living documents. And where the FRS and URS tell you what the system will do, they have to be unique and testable functions. There has to be at least one test script for every requirement in the FRS. Now, the system design specification or configuration specification, if it's a configurable system, tells you how the functionality will be delivered. That has to be addressed so that you make sure every functional requirement has at least one design specification showing how it's delivered. Users sign off on this, maintain them as current documents. And then your testing, the IQ, OQ, and PQ. IQ should be performed on all hardware, operating software, and applications. The OQ should be done on any code. There should be unit integration testing if it's developed code. If it's configurable, you want to make sure every requirement is met. And in PQ, you're going to test it specifically to the way the system will be used by the users. You want a detailed test protocol for each of these. There should be test scenarios and scripts for the OQ and PQ. There should be positive and negative scenarios, boundary and stress testing in the PQ, showing you've really challenged the system. Positive scenario tells you that it does what it purports to do, whereas a negative scenario tells you it doesn't do what it doesn't purport to do, or what it's not supposed to do. Every defect must be followed up. There must be segregation of duties during testing. Results have to be documented according to GDPs, contemporaneous to the action, and a summary report written for each phase. A requirements traceability matrix is critical to show that for every functional requirement, there's at least one design element and at least one test script. The FDA may ask for this as part of your validation documentation. And the GAN5D model expresses the entire SDLC, where we talked about validation planning, the URS, the FRS, the system design and configuration design coming down the left side, and going up the right, the IQ, OQ, PQ, and your final report. You also want a training plan. People who are using the system need to know how to use it. People who are developing or maintaining the system, your IT internal group, or it could be a vendor, but they need to understand how to document things for FDA. Also, anyone who's going to be doing validation work needs to understand the process, validation, the life cycle, the protocols that have to be completed, and the whole process. And organizational change management is important to get people, especially if you're moving to an ETM or eTMF, you're going to be taking paper out of the hands of people and giving them electronic access to workflows. They need to understand that it's okay to do this. It's a big change to their life, their day-to-day life, but it's going to improve efficiency and it'll improve quality. Once your system is ready, it's been fully tested, the users sign off on the system acceptance form indicating they agree it does what it purports to do. And the system steward, whether internal IT or some other vendor contractor, they issue the notification of release into production indicating from this time and point forward, any data collected in the system or documents are valid. And you have to maintain your system in a validated state until retirement. Operational and support manuals and scripts, procedures for day-to-day activities, the logs to record things, anything related to maintenance, changes, change control, anything related to security, monitoring the logs and making sure access is provided properly. Access to your system should be role-based, never name-based, and a person should be given access based on the role they have to perform, no more than that. Change control is critical. You want to have audit trails. That's essential for any kind of validated system. The FDA will be looking for audit trails because they are going to tell you the complete chronology or history of data and documents. No one should be able to deactivate, disable, or delete these. Backup and recovery, there should be provision if the system goes down. And archival, you want to make sure you're able to retain these records and documents because they can be required for 25 years after the study's completed. Security is critical, making sure only the right people have access to the right actions. System integration, if you have any new interfaces or integration points once the system is in place. If you're adding something to it, you must test that before putting it in production. And you should have disaster recovery, indicating how you recover the system if a disaster occurs, and also a business continuity plan, so that if the system is not available, how does the business continue operations? Do they put things down on paper and then back enter them, or collect things on a spreadsheet? How they do that should be defined in a plan. Everything should be followed in terms of procedures to the letter, and all the logs should be maintained to show everything is within control. There should be internal audits, and at least annually, you should review each system to make sure it has been maintained in a validated state and document that in a report. Look at change controls, security logs, any kind of incident reports. And you should have a governance board. This is particularly critical where you have an ECM or eTMF, where you need to have a body who can be in charge of saying whether or not changes should be made, understanding what those changes mean, and making sure they fit in with the strategy for all your clinical trials. And at the end of the life of the system, it has to be retired. And you want to make sure that your documentation is associated with the system is retired as well. If there's data on the system or documents that are still under retention, you may have to migrate or even convert them to other media. In this section, I'm not going to go through this in depth, but this is basic GXP document requirements. Written records, legal documents. They provide a full data trail of everything that happens, demonstrate work conducted in alignment with FDA requirements. In your trial master file or eTMF collection, you need to make sure that everything that happens is captured, is documented, and can be reconstructed if FDA inspects. You want to make sure that all of the documentation related to your validation effort is also GXP. Training and skill qualifications should be done. Make sure that those are on file, and everyone who's using the system or validating it is trained adequately and given the right access. Make sure your policies and procedures support your activities. And make sure you follow segregation of duties. No one is going to review their own work. Any deviation is recorded. Make sure that all the deviations are resolved before you move forward. Now, all of your data must be ALCOA, attributable to an individual authenticated unique person, legible on screen or on paper, contemporaneously recorded at the time the event or the action is taken. Original or true copy, be able to prove that the true copy matches an original and have that documented as well. And it must be accurate. These are principles set forth by FDA in their guidance for data integrity issued in December of 2018. And they are looking very carefully at these attributes on your data and your other systems, because they want to make sure data integrity is maintained. They're finding way too many issues with that. You have to also defend the meaning of your writing during a future audit, inspection, and you have to do that accurately and quickly. You have to be able to respond with confidence. And document retention. Make sure you understand the retention period required. Make sure that documents are in human readable format and readily available for inspection. That means on screen or on paper, and should be destroyed once the retention period is over. Now, email should never be used as a source of documentation unless you print it, sign and date it. Email can be modified. And here's a policy checklist. Just if you are doing an electronic system, these are the various policies. I won't go through each one, but telling you what content needs to be or what topic needs to be covered. These can be done individually, or you can combine them in any way you want. but the topics should be covered for these policies. And here's a procedure checklist, also topical, so you can combine or keep them separate, but at least address each one somehow in your procedures. These are more of them, and then some related to maintaining your system. Now, just a word on Part 11. Part 11 is a law, and if you're using electronic records or signatures, there are specific criteria you have to define which will show that your electronic records and signatures are accurate, secure, authentic, trustworthy, reliable, confidential, and can be considered the equivalent of paper records and handwritten signatures on paper. This particular slide is very important and should be the basis for any procedure you put together or specifications saying what you consider to be criteria met for Part 11 compliance. So Part 11 allows you to consider paper to be replaced by electronic or a handwritten signature to be replaced by an electronic signature if you meet Part 11 compliance. Now, the guidance was issued in 1997, and I won't go through all the specifics of it, except that signatures have to be trustworthy and reliable. Electronic signatures have to be considered the equivalent of handwritten signatures, and you have to prove that through testing. You want to use quality and compliance in your everyday programs to be inspection ready. And if you're unsure about how to prove that Part 11 is met, think about what you're required to do for paper and handwritten signatures. What does the FDA expect? They have the same expectation for electronic records and signatures, only how you do that, how you comply, is going to be a different way. Determine in advance and document that you're going to use electronic records or signatures. And make sure you have a range of features in your system to be able to handle it, audit trail being one of the most important. Identity management, assigned roles, segregation of duties, security, document integrity. All of these things should be built into your system capability. You should also have, again, the backup and business continuity planning. File formats and document retention should be clarified so you know how you can manage your documents and your files across systems that may be interoperable or may not be. Change control. How do you handle changes to hardware, software components? Training. How do you make sure people changing roles or coming into the organization new are adequately trained? And are you prepared for FDA inspection and audit at all times? The audit trail must capture who took what action on a document or on a record of data. And you can never obscure the prior record. You must keep all cumulative records. You want to know who did the change, what they changed, what was the original value, the new value, what was the old document, what did it look like, what does the new document look like, what was changed, who did it, when they did it, and why they did it. They must have a reason. This is to prevent fraud. Never deactivate or delete your audit trail, and make sure your date and time stamps are synchronized to Meridian or Standard Time, and no one can change those. Identity management. Make sure that you identify unique individuals based on a set of parameters like biometrics, digital signatures, hand capture, a handwriting capture in software, scanning in a paper signature, electronic signature capability in a system. It can be done many ways. And make sure the signature shows the intent, not just the name and date and time, conveys the intent or meaning of the signature, and is permanently locked, never edited. And you should notify FDA that you're using electronic signatures, but you can document that in a policy or procedure in the cases where you're doing it. Segregation of duties, clear, defined, separate roles, separate credentials. Security, access should only be to those who have the capability, the qualifications, And you must have a cumulative record of everyone with access to the system over time, even if they've left the organization. Their record should be deactivated. You also want to have their access privileges described for each person. And you want to make sure you have antivirus, anti-malware, anti-ransomware, that type of software, firewalls. You want numerous levels of security. You can ask for a second signature approval if you decide that that's important to have a second password. You also want to design your system that it will attribute every document to an individual subject who either created or modified it. Be able to describe everything to FDA and be able to reconstruct all source documentation. Include the documentation of what hardware and software are used. You want a full backup. It should be either a redundant server or some other form where you have a full backup and recovery capability. File formats and retentions. You want to preserve copies in formats like XML, PDF, or hard copy, or something that is easily shared amongst different systems and platforms. Everything must be produced contemporaneously. You have to maintain records by predicate rule, and you can have hybrid situations of paper and electronic. And change control. Every change to your system must be identified, must be documented. You have to evaluate the effect or impact of the change and test and validate to make sure that the change is working properly and you haven't caused any harm to any other code. Training. Make sure everyone has the right experience and training to do their role. That should be documented. And inspection and audit. You have to be able to provide an investigator with reasonable and useful access to records. You have to produce copies of documents in common portable formats when they're maintained in those, and use established automated conversion or export methods if that is the way you do things. You want to show the FDA exactly what you do in your organization. You want to be able to determine if FDA is asking during an inspection, who's authorized to put data in, to change it, to how can you tell when it's entered, how can you tell when data is changed? That's through your audit trail. When do you lock down the data as final? All of these things may be questions they'll ask. They'll ask you to show some data and documents, show the history of them, show how you control their life cycle, show that the system is validated, the requirements are met. That's through your requirements traceability matrix, or RTM. Show the results of all your validation activities, your IQ, OQ, and PQ test results. Make sure that all your validation deliverable documents are locked down. Make sure your validation includes pass-fail, signature, date, time stamp, and you manage any deviation. Use objective evidence, screenshots, page printouts. Now, companies want to meet FDA requirements for compliance, and also it's important to focus on customer safety, product quality, and data integrity, but it'll also give you a very efficient way of doing things and promote good relations and a good image and reputation, because FDA will publish warning letters, and that will go out and be available to any competitors or your customers. Now, the FDA operates on several key premises. If you don't document something, you didn't do it. If you could have committed fraud, you did commit fraud. If you don't have an audit trail, for example, then you could have changed something and obscured an original value. In that case, you had the opportunity to commit fraud, and FDA will assume you did. And if you don't adhere to a policy or procedure and follow it to the letter, and you don't document that as a deviation with a reasonable explanation, then you're going to be found guilty. And there's no recourse. FDA will hold you guilty until you prove your innocence. They can issue fines, confiscate materials, and shut down operations, as they did with Schering-Plough Pharmaceutical in 1998. That consent decree cost them $500 million in fines, caused them to shut down more than one of their operations and took 10 years to recover. The FDA has many tools: regulatory meetings, injunctions, consent decrees, and port alerts, and so forth. Now, the warning letter in particular, this is if you have 483 citations and you don't respond effectively or in a timely manner. You can get a warning letter. Or if you have so many egregious errors, they decide a warning letter is due. It's official, goes to the CEO of your company, lists out the serious violations, and it's published on the FDA website so anyone can see that. And it's important to note recent warning letter trends related to data and record integrity, and in particular, lack of control over access to computer systems, not recording things contemporaneously, and even deletion, falsification, alteration, or manipulation of data. Make sure your testing of any system can make sure that this cannot be done, and make sure that you document it. Now, this just shows data integrity being very high up on the findings and what is resulting from recent warning letters. It's a trend that FDA has noted, hence their guidance on data integrity issued in December 2018. The areas most at risk during inspection: security and access, testing and validation, training and expertise, and documentation. And so we went through many of these, so I'm not going to do these in detail, but this will give you examples of what people are doing that they shouldn't be doing. Security and access, testing and validation, not sufficient, not even done, or documentation lacking. No traceability matrix. Training not mandatory, or mandatory not enforced. People who are doing work on behalf of your company but are not trained adequately. And users who are deciding that they don't like the new automated workflow if you're putting an eTMF in, and they keep managing things on an Excel spreadsheet or on paper, but they're keeping 2 sets of books. You want to root this out and make sure people aren't doing it, because that could lead to confusion about where decisions are made from. Internal auditors must be fluent in the validation process and the systems that they're overseeing. Training records, CVs should all be on file. Documentation should be done according to the SDLC. And remember, these are all requirements that have been around a long time. The paper-based and electronic data systems have the same requirements. It's how you implement them, or the controls you implement, that are different. Now, some best practice examples: maintain all clinical trial testing data, ensure data is attributable to specific people, make sure there's no opportunity for falsification or inaccuracy of data, complete documentation contemporaneously, and ensure raw data is always available, or original documentation. And these are some examples of cases where FDA found shortcomings, where clinical lab records where raw data was not maintained. It was discarded in the trash. Here, calculations that were performed using a target sample were out of specification, but the injections weren't reviewed and evaluated when making the decision to release a batch. And other things: ignoring out of specification results, testing to compliance, switching audit trails on or off at any time. These are all violations. Manipulating date and time stamps. FDA is getting detailed training in these areas of data integrity and compliance, so you can expect a lot of questions. Here, they only retained the most favorable result for tests without justifying it. Just threw some out. Didn't have proper controls, making sure only authorized people did changes to master production and control records. Basic lab controls lacking, audit trails turned off, no control over chain of custody or life cycle of data or documents, sharing usernames and passwords. not doing things contemporaneously, destroying original records, putting things on a sticky note, and then transcribing it later on into the system. That is not acceptable to FDA. Backdating records. So we covered a lot of material, and we talked about the importance of data integrity primarily, because that's really what it all comes down to. When you're doing your clinical trial studies, your trial master file, whether it's a paper TMF or an electronic TMF, the data and the documents you're collecting are critical to being able to show that you are doing the study properly and that all your data and results are valid. So it's important to understand the documentation to collect along the way. You want to make sure you have the files that are collected before the trial starts, during the conduct of the trial, and after the trial is completed or terminated. You want to evaluate options for automating the whole clinical trial document workflow and storage through an eTMF. Consider formats and interoperability with stakeholder systems. Know the minimum set of files to be collected before, during, and after the trial, and understand record retention periods. Any computer system used in creating, storing, managing, or data or documents related to a trial should be validated according to FDA requirements based on the SDLC. Look at the risk in GAMP5 category of the system when determining the validation approach, the level of testing required. Understand 21 CFR Part 11 compliance if you're using electronic records and signatures. Make sure there's training available for users, support personnel, auditors, and anyone doing validation work. And manage all your GXP systems according to the SDLC from development through retirement. If it's validated, make sure it is maintained in a validated state throughout its life. Have all your documentation thoroughly prepared in compliance with FDA. And understand some of the recent trends in FDA inspection and oversight, particularly focusing on assurance of data and record integrity. That is where FDA is hitting the hardest in the last few years, as they've seen a huge increase in the number of issues encountered during inspection. My general comment about industry is that today everyone is being asked to do more work with fewer people, and the pressure can cause people to be careless or to make mistakes. And that is showing up very clearly in the results of FDA inspections. So now we can go to Q&A.